All right, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Capital District Special Education Task Force, welcome to this morning's presentation, Section 504 and Students with Disabilities in Public and Private Schools. We have Tina Beauparlant from Parent to Parent of New York State here this morning.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well this morning on this chilly morning. I know yesterday was really, really cold, was not ready for 29 degrees, but that's what we're getting. So this morning we're going to talk about Section 504, and I am going to apologize in case I have coughing attacks. I will be stopping at certain times, so if you hear a pause or something, it's not that my sound is having issues. I will be taking a drink here and there. So that you're not all listening to me cough during the presentation. So I do apologize in advance for that. I'm also going to turn my camera off so that I can just focus on the slides. And we will be doing a lot of slides and then stopping for any questions. And Alyssa will be addressing all of my questions for me. She'll read them to me and then we'll address them at that point in time. So with that said, I'm going to pull my screen up. And we will begin the presentation. I'm also going to turn my camera off so that I can focus and we can begin the presentation. So with that, the topic that we're here all today to talk about is Section 504, Students with Disabilities in Public and Private Schools. So what does Section 504 really mean? Section 504, the purpose of it, it's a civil rights law as the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, is to prevent discrimination. Oh, but I'm not advancing my slides over here. I apologize. To prevent discrimination and guarantee equal opportunity. Section 504 ensures an individual process that qualified students with disabilities have equal access to education. Section 504 does not guarantee that students will achieve certain results, which is very important. Like some parents say, oh, well, my child's an A student and things like that. That's not the purpose of a 504. 504 is basically accommodations, modifications for students and prevent discrimination. So what does Section 504 say? Which is very, very important, okay? The phrase no otherwise qualified individual means a person must meet all other requirements that are bulleted out for participation in a program in order to protect against discrimination on the basis of his or her disability, be excluded from the participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Even if a program receives $1, they must abide by the laws. When people think about educating students with disabilities, the first thing that comes to mind is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. Although students can receive accommodations, related services, and special education under both 504 and IDEA, the two laws vary in a number of important different ways. They will be explained in this presentation. Some of the key legal differences are IDEA is a federal statute that provides funds to states' special education programs on the conditions that the specific requirements outlined in IDEA are followed. Section 504 prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability, but does not provide any type of funding. Entitles that federal funding financial assistance must apply to complying with Section 504 as a condition of receiving federal funding. The Office of Civil Rights, OCR, enforces school districts' compliance with Section 504. The state agencies enforce school districts' compliance with IDEA regarding individual students. Many students with disabilities are protected underneath both IDEA and 504. And districts may comply with certain 504 requirements by following IDEA procedures. Although all students who receive special education services under IDEA are protected by 504, not all students are protected under 504 qualify for IDEA services. Also, if a student is receiving special education services under IDEA, there is no reason to have a 504 plan. So to be clear, a person cannot have both a 504 and an IEP. They will have one or the other. Okay, a lot of parents are underneath the assumption that their kids can have both. It's not. It's one or the other. Okay. And the other important thing that I want you all to take away is if a parent ever decides that they want to refer their child and they want to revoke consent for evaluation, for services underneath IDEA, the child may still be eligible for a 504. Not all parents want their children to have IEPs. They want to try, then some people will pull back consent. But if that's the case, we can also try to look at a 504 to see if that might be something that we can help a student with regards to whatever's going on that they're struggling with. So here's a comparison slide of understanding IDEA and 504. First, the thing we're going to talk about is the funding. Section 504 does not authorize any funding to state or school districts to provide services needed by students under Section 504. IDEA, however, is a funding statute, which means that state and local education agencies must ascribe to IDEA provisions in order to receive the related funding. IDEA services are funded by a combination of state and federal funding. Eligibility determination, the definition of an eligible student with a disability is defined under Section 504 and IDEA. The IDEA eligibility criteria is more strict than Section 504. And then there's an evaluation process. IDEA requirements are much more detailed regarding evaluations. So kids with IEPs are evaluated yearly. Kids with 504s, it's initial, and then it could be periodically. But I think most school districts will do some sort of little evaluation and or updating of the 504 for a student on a yearly basis. Now, are they typically done prior to the new school year? No, not all the time. Sometimes some schools will wait until September for the new team because some of the kids might be changing buildings or different teachers. They might wait till like September to let the new teachers get to know who the child is, then sit down and talk about the 504 of what's on there. Is it appropriate? Do we need to add more? Do we need to change things up? That's how some school districts might do it. So they might not always do it prior to the school year. They might wait till the school year starts to sit down and assess what's kind of going on with the child and do we need to change things. Then we have FAPE, okay? FAPE is free, appropriate public education, although both Section 504 and IDEA require that a student with a disability receive a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. The definition of FAPE is different between the two laws. Under Section 504, FAPE means that the needs of a qualified child with disabilities are met as equitable as the needs of a child without disabilities. The focus is primarily on, equal access. Under IDEA, FAPE means that students with disabilities receive an individualized education program, which is your IEP, that meets the student's unique needs, provides access to the general education curriculum, meets grade level standards, and from which the child receives educational benefits. The inclusion of educational benefits is an especially important distinction between the two laws. So very important that you understand the difference between FAPE, okay? And then of course there's a plan. There's a 504 plan and there's an IEP plan. A plan is a written plan, and a written plan is not always required with a 504 plan. Okay, by law, they don't have to do it, but most schools, districts do it in New York State, okay? But OCR considers it's best practice to ensure all parties understand the agreement in order for it to have equal access for the student with a disability. So that's why we rate things out so that everybody knows what they're doing with a student with a 504, as well as with an IEP, because an IEP, it's required that it's in writing. We have goals, we have objectives, we have present levels of performance. But with a 504, it's a very simple document that is listing out the accommodations for the student. Now, a lot of districts almost, if you're not sure what you're looking at sometimes, they sometimes will use a format written in an IEP format, okay? So some parents go, oh, I'm not sure if it's an IEP or a 504, especially I know when I'm talking to a lot of families. So they have to really look and see if it says 504, okay? They might use some of the same formats when they're creating a 504 plan, okay? And they can do that as long as people know which they have, whether it's an IEP or a 504. Okay, but they typically will write them both out. And then of course we have enforcement. The Office of Civil Rights, known as OCR, enforces schools' compliance with Section 504. The state education agencies enforce district compliance with IDEA with regards to individual students. So there's two different agencies that oversee 504s and IEPs, which is very important for everybody to know. It's not one spot. Excuse me. Okay, what defines a disability under Section 504? Okay. So the determination of substantial limitations must be made on a case-by-case basis with respect to each child. Very, very important. It's not one size fits all kids. It's on a case-by-case basis. Section 504 does not provide a definition of substantial limitations. It looks at everything, as I said, on a case-by-case basis, okay? Section 504 defines disabilities as a person who has an impairment that substantially limits the student's ability to perform one or more major life activities. In order to qualify as a person with a disability who may be entitled to Section 504 services, a student must meet all three of the disability definitions, and we're going to go over them during this presentation. The disability definition also includes someone who has a record of having such an impairment or is regarded as having an impairment. Students who have a record of having an impairment or regarding having an impairment are not eligible for FAPE under Section 504 services, but are prohibited from discrimination on a basis of disability. And that's more medical basis for some students. So very important, because some people go, oh, my child has this and he or she should be eligible for a 504. They have to look at a lot of different things to really see if a student is eligible for a 504, or is that student eligible for an IEP. So there's a lot of factors that go into this. It's just not a quick sit down and we're going to give them this. You really need to look at a lot of information and documentation to see who is eligible and who is not eligible, okay? And 504s are really, as I said to you, accommodation types of plans. It helps eliminate barriers for students so that he or she can participate in school just like any other student without a disability. And I'm going to grab a drink before I start to choke again. Okay. 504 disability definitions, impairments. Okay. Under Section 504, an impairment is a psychological condition that affects a bodily system. The precise definition of physical or mental impairment from the Section 504 regulations is any psychological disorder, any physiological disorder or condition, cosmetic disfigurement, autonomic loss affecting one or more of the following bodily functions: neurological, musculoskeletal, special sense organs, respiratory, including speech organs, cardiovascular, reproductive, digestive, and then we have lymphatic, skin, or any mental or psychological disorder, such as an intellectual disability, organic brain syndrome, emotional or mental illness, or specific learning disabilities. Section 504 does not provide a list of specific diseases or conditions that qualify as an impairment. Because I get people that say, well, does this qualify? There's no specific list, okay? It's not a one size fits all, and we need to take each case very differently in looking at it, okay? So some examples of disabilities that may qualify a student for services through Section 504 could include, but not limited to, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, cancer. I just lost my spot and I apologize. The whole thing just went. I'm looking at different notes and forgive me. And I apologize. My whole thing went, so forgive me. Yep. All right. Could be diabetes, heart disease, dyslexia, dysgraphia, arthritis. Okay. ADD, ADHD, believe it or not, it's all in how does it impair that student academically is really what we're looking at. Allergies, asthma, those kind of things. So you're also going to receive a copy of the PowerPoint, as well as what we can do is get you the actual other documents that go along with this, because there are some things that they do have in these other documents on Section 504. So having an impairment is only the first part to qualify under Section 504 as a student with a disability. So it's very important that you know that these are some things that may qualify you. But again, it's how is it impeding your son or daughter in school next to their non-disabled peers? That's what we need to look at, okay? When we're talking about substantial limits of one or more major life activities. Now we're going to talk about mitigating factors, okay? And for some reason, my slide just got all messed up. Okay. So 504 disability definition, substantial limitations, okay? Substantial limitations, in order to determine the level of limitations, one should consider the condition, manner, and duration of the impairment. There are specific mitigating measures that may not be considered, such as if somebody is using hearing aids or medication or things like that to help them with their condition. And this also includes specific limiting impairments that may be episodic or go into remission, which could be cancer, depression, different things like that. So the term substantial limitation, there's some examples. For example, an allergy that causes a rash would probably not be considered a substantial limitation, but an allergy causing an anaphylactic shock would likely be, absolutely, okay? Mitigating measures are factors that decrease the impact of a disability, such as medications, hearing aid, prosthetic limbs, or there are other aids that are used to manage an impairment. Mitigating measures were considered when school districts determine whether or not a student with a disability, I apologize. Mitigating measures were considered when school districts determined whether or not a student had a disability. For example, if a student with diabetes effectively manages his or her condition with insulin, okay, they would not be considered having a disability because they're using something to help manage their disease. For example, mitigating measures according to the law, like assistive technology, reasonable accommodations, auxiliary aids or services, learned behavior or adaptive neurological modifications. The only exception is the use of ordinary eyeglasses or contact lenses, okay? The second point is that conditions that are episodic in nature or in remission can still be considered as a qualifying impairment if they result in substantial limitations when they are active. Examples of conditions that meet this criteria include cancer, epilepsy, and depression. Okay. So very important for these kind of things because certain things do go in remission and certain things do not. And I will have to say to you that when I saw depression, I was kind of like, okay, they have meds that can help with that, but to say that that can go in remission, I'm kind of like, okay, it comes and goes, but I guess that's how they look at it. We're going to keep going, of course, and we will be stopping, as I said. So type any questions that you may have in, okay? Um, this is a list of some things that are major life activities: caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, standing, lifting, bending, seeing, hearing, speaking, eating, sleeping, working, breathing, learning, writing, thinking, reading, concentrating. Okay. So the final part of the definition under section 504 is that the impairment must substantially limit a student's ability to perform a major life activity. Okay. And major life activities are things that are essential for daily living. Everything I just said to you is essential for us to live daily living. Okay. Both section 504 regulations and the Americans with Disabilities Education Amendments Act list examples of major life activities, but it's not an all-inclusive list. Again, by a case-by-case basis is when we're looking at a 504 to see if a student qualifies for a 504. So if a student may not qualify for a 504, he or she may qualify for an IEP. And some kids go from an IEP where they're declassified and may go down to a 504. So they can work between the two. But that's a lot of things when you think about it. So when you're thinking about, does my child need a 504? Possibly, you would have to be looking at all of these things and also look at how does it impair your son or daughter or student in some way, shape, or form when we're thinking about school. And here is some more major life activities. These are bodily functions: brain, circulatory, okay, a lot of different things that are bodily functions. The Americans with Disabilities Act further broadened the definition of disabilities by adding a list of bodily functions that should be considered as major life activities. These are more medical-based major life activities. The other ones were more everyday daily stuff. This is more medical-based, okay? And again, not an all-inclusive list, okay? And how does it impede your son or daughter or the student you're working with? The inclusion of bodily functions in the list of major life activities covered by Section 504 may be especially helpful for students with medical conditions such as diabetes or epilepsy. Previously, schools may have developed health plans for these students, but not conducted a full 504 evaluation to determine what services and supports may be needed to ensure they can fully participate at school and in school related activities such as field trips and things like that. Because some of these things could impede a student in some way, shape, or form during the course of a school day. And we want to make sure that they're not discriminated against based upon their medical needs. Okay. And what some people might do is when it's medical related, turn around and, as I just said to you, develop a health plan. And there's a thing called an IHP, individualized health plan. It is not a legal mandated document that the schools use, but it is something that could be very, very beneficial for the school to create for a student who has medical needs. And I can make sure that I get that off to Alyssa and she can send that document out to everybody as well. It's a simple document that's filled out. I always look at it this way. If you have a student who may have some of these issues. It's very important, and I just said to you, like diabetes and things like that. It's important for the teacher to kind of know what's going on with the student. Does the student know that he or she, when their blood levels are dropping, do they need to go to the nurse at certain times? Do we need to watch for certain things in the classroom? I'd rather have people know what's going on before a child collapses in a classroom, and know that that child might not realize what's happening to him or her, and get them to the nurse or whoever they need to be brought to immediately before they collapse in the classroom. It's just very important when we're thinking about things, get the appropriate people involved to help the student, because again, we are not trying to discriminate against any student. We're trying to make sure that we're building in some sort of accommodations, modifications, and support for that student so that he or she can be doing things just like their non-disabled peers, irregardless of their medical issues. Now, I'm going to stop and I'm going to see if there's any comments and or questions. Alyssa, you want to tell me what I got?
So we actually have nothing in the chat thus far, but anyone who has questions, feel free to type them in now.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question. Is what I'm saying so far making sense, or is the next piece, I think, going to make more sense to you? So are you understanding what I'm explaining to you so far? If you want to give us a thumbs up, that would be great, so that I'm sure that you're understanding what I'm talking about. And Alyssa, if you can let me know if you're getting some thumbs.
We are getting some thumbs.
Good. Okay, perfect. All right. So that's great. So maybe the next piece is really going to help you more so understand, because everything I was giving you was the legal background of everything, so that you understood there's a clear difference between IEP, IDEA, and then there's a clear difference between 504, especially the funding, because a lot of parents assume that there's funding underneath 504, and there's not any funding that comes along with it. So I think the next section that we're going to talk about is really going to help everybody a little bit more. And that's why I specifically do it this way, because this is really how it applies to us with our kids in school.
We
So
did get one question in
yes,
just
ma'am.
now.
Yeah.
So someone asked to clarify if a student who has ADHD is on medication and the concerning behaviors that were impacting academics are not being seen anymore in the classroom, that student would no longer be eligible for a 504, correct?
Yes and no, because what if the parents so chose to stop the medication, then those behaviors may come back. So and any parent that so chooses to place his or her child on medication, that is a personal parental decision. I would say that would be something that you would want to have a conversation with them. I certainly would not want to pull away a 504 if it's there just because the child's on medication. I would really want to wait a while to really see how he or she is doing. Yes, the meds are helping, which is great, but we really want to make sure that we have helped. We want to make sure that we've helped that child with any strategies that he or she needs to do before we go pulling things away. I never want to see a child fall on their face. I want to make sure that we've given them the appropriate strategies to try first. So that's the only way that I can answer that. I would say have a conversation, see where people are going, because it doesn't mean if we did remove a 504 that we couldn't put one back in place, but why remove it right away? I would say have a conversation about that. I hope that helps. Are we good, Alyssa?
Yep, that's all the questions we have for now.
All right, perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about this in the sense of the school, public and private schools, and reinforcing the important information that also applies, and making sure that you understand that public and private schools that receive federal funds have to do these things that we're talking about. And I hope you don't mind that I'm pulling all the bullets up at once, okay? Okay. So the intent again of the civil rights law is to provide equal opportunity and prevent discrimination based on disability. And public schools must provide FAPE, free appropriate public education, to each qualified student with a disability. Okay. So As I said to you before, it's a civil rights law, such as the Rehabilitation Act. Section 504 is to prevent discrimination and guarantee equal opportunity. Section 504 ensures through a individualized process that qualified students with disabilities have equal access to education. This levels the playing field, which is very important. According to Section 504, public schools must provide a free, appropriate public education, also known as FAPE. A lot of people need to make sure that they know that, to qualifying students with disabilities. The first part of the FAPE definition is free, okay? Parents cannot be charged for additional services or accommodations that are needed because of a child's disability. They can, however, be charged, for certain fees or activities for, school trips and things like that. But for services in school, no. If your child is going on field trips and things like that, yes, parents will pay fees like all other children would be paying those kind of fees. But it's very important that you understand everything that the school is providing underneath the 504 is free to parents. You are not paying for these things, okay? Irregardless of how they're funded, we as parents are not paying for services or supports. I know I had a parent that I worked with many years ago. Her child was allergic to erasers and things like that, and rubber stuff. So she went out and because she didn't know any better, she went out and bought all different types of pencils for the class, all sorts of things for the class, and she had no clue that she didn't have to do that. And I'm like, why are you doing it for the whole class? She goes, well, I don't want my child to be touching these things. And I understood that because her child would get really sick from touching just the erasers or anything that was like an eraser. So she went and spent tons and tons of money on these things. And I said, nope, we can't be doing that. We need to sit and we need to talk to the school, you know, and come up with some sort of plan here, because you are financially spending thousands of dollars on things for your child, which I understand. She wanted her child to be protected, but we now need to sit down and talk to the school. And once we sat down with them and we created, because she didn't know anything about even a 504, once we sat and did that, she wasn't spending all of that money, and it was easy to make sure that her child didn't touch erasers or things like that. Even on the playground, we had to be very, very cautious because certain types of things on the playground that her child may have touched. And I don't mean just a simple rash. These things really could have harmed her child medically to the point where the child would have been hospitalized. So, but she didn't know that we could work with the school on these types of things. And it really was beneficial to the child. I apologize. Sorry. So 504 and FAPE, what is an appropriate education? Okay. Meets a student's individual needs as equitably as the student of, no- of s- yeah, equitably as the needs of non-disabled students are met, places students with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate, and includes evaluations and placement procedures, and establishes due process procedures. So according to the Office of Civil Rights, there are 4 components to ensure that a student's education is appropriate, okay? The needs of a student with a disability must be met to the same extent as students who do not have disabilities, even if the school must provide additional services, supports, modifications, or accommodations to meet their needs. An appropriate education can be provided through regular education, special education, related aids, or related services. It's important to note that this does not mean that students with disabilities will receive the best education possible, but only that the quality of education services provided will be the same as what is provided to non-disabled students. This also includes equal access to non-academic services provided by public schools, such as extracurricular activities, after-school programs, athletics, transportation, and health services. An appropriate education also means that proper safeguards are in place and known by parents, so parents can appeal decisions through a specific process. So when I say the best, as parents, we all want the best for our children. We really do. That's something we always will say, I want the best. Okay. But we're not entitled to the best. We're entitled to what is appropriate. When you think about school, it is appropriate. What is appropriate for that child to help him or her academically? What is appropriate for him or her to be able to navigate through the school, you know, to if they can't do certain things that meets their needs with their non-disabled peers. It's never the best. It's going to be appropriate. So, and that's something as a parent I learned when my son was in second grade in the middle of my first impartial hearing when I said I wanted the best for my son. And I always do. And I got greeted by legal counsel from the school district, literally pointing their fingers centimeters from my nose, and her exact words were, and I quote, Mrs. Beauperlant, you're not entitled to the best. I'm not going to give you the best. You're going to get appropriate, and that's it. And then she sat back down. And when somebody invades your space, you're kind of like, oh my Lord. But it proved the point for the hearing officer, and that was not necessary. So that was a very valuable lesson that I took from that hearing, that I will always want the best, but I will never say those words. And I will always say what is appropriate, what are his needs, and whether that's for any parent that has an IEP and or a 504. What are the needs and what are we attempting to do to support that child within their education environment? Okay, very, very important to always remember that. Okay, the following process is used to ensure that schools provide qualified students with disabilities with an appropriate education. Not all schools will implement each of these steps in the same way, but the overall process is similar. Each step we will be describing further in detail through the presentation, okay? So they got to do evaluations. There's the referral evaluations, eligibility determination, the development of a 504 plan, the review and reevaluations. Now, most parents that are referring their child for a 504, they're probably just going to the Committee on Special Education, okay? Referring the child there, and if the child doesn't meet the criteria for an IEP, then they bring it down to a 504. But you can make separate referrals if you feel you want to. You can refer to the 504 committee, or you could refer to the CSE. I have always told all of my families over the years, refer immediately to the CSE first. Let's determine that he or she does not need an IEP. And if they don't, then the CSE committee will turn around and probably say, let's look at a 504 plan, and then they refer it to the 504 team. But every district does things a little differently. As long as they do similar things, we're fine, but they can turn around and do things in their own way. Excuse me. Okay. Districts have child find obligations to evaluate students who they suspect may have a disability, and parents may want to consider 504 evaluations if their child did not qualify for services underneath IDEA, as I just said, but has shown a pattern of not succeeding in the general education classroom, or has a diagnosis that needs accommodations to fully participate in school activities. Okay. So as I said, you, the parent, may request the referral for evaluation under 504 for various types of reasons. Okay, things are happening, the teacher and you are talking, and we're like, let's just make this referral. They may know that your child also has a disability, but the student was found ineligible, as we said, under IDEA. The student may be struggling academically or in danger of being retained. We don't want to retain children. Schools don't like to retain kids in any way, shape, or form. It's very rare that you will see a child actually retained, okay? A parent may also request a 504 evaluation if, okay, they have revoked consent, as I said to you earlier. for special education services under IDEA, and a request for evaluations should be made in writing to the school section 504 coordinator. The school can do that, or you, the parent, can turn around and find out who the 504 coordinator is, and you can make the actual referral yourself. Some districts' websites will have it listed as to who the 504 coordinator is. And in some districts, because they might be very small districts, the CSE chairperson or director of pupil personnel, because that's who pretty much runs everything, may be the 504 coordinator. So always check your district website and see what's there. And if you still can't find it there, give the school district a call and ask them who the 504 coordinator is. Because it could be one and the same, the CSE and the 504. Okay. So that's very important to make sure that you do that. Okay, so we need to look at certain things here. Does the student have a disability under section 504 when we're looking at the purpose for evaluations and requirements? Does the student have a disability under section 504? If so, what are the student's individual education needs? Some things that we need to make sure we're asking. And we need to make sure that we are using any valid testing that is conducted by somebody, a trained person. Access all areas of education needs. Accurately reflect achievement rather than the disability. And include process for periodic reevaluation. So there are many reasons why an evaluation is required as part of a 504 process. So you will be having some sort of eval. We're not just going to sit there and talk about things. We will be having an evaluation. That's why I say the first place to refer should be the committee. Let's be sure there is no disability that we're going to see that the student may need an IEP versus a 504. Okay. So the committee on CSE will do the evaluation. And if they feel as though the child does not need an IEP, then, and they feel as though they still need something to help them because they're struggling, then they will refer it to the 504 team. Okay. The purpose of the evaluation is to gather individual information about the student to determine whether this child has a disability and is eligible for section 504 protections or services, as well as what services or accommodations the student may need. Even students who have medical diagnoses must be evaluated to determine if they have a qualifying disability under section 504. Data from the evaluation also helps the team make service placements, decisions based on the student's individual needs. Remember, individualized, case by case, not a one size fits all. Evaluations must be completed within a reasonable amount of time also, okay? And the 504 regulations do not provide specific timelines, but OCR, Office of Civil Rights, has interpreted this to be similar to the requirements underneath IDEA, which requires the initial evaluation to be conducted within 60 calendar days of parental consent, and then 60 days for implementation if he or she meets the requirement. Okay. Very important to make sure you understand the timelines of all of these things. The procedure development by the school must ensure that the following criteria are met. Tests and other evaluation materials must be validated for the purposes of being used. So we have to have updated testing. This means the person conducting the test must be trained to administer the test correctly. And section 504 regulations also do not provide detailed requirements for periodic evaluations of students underneath section 504, but they do not provide procedures assistance with IDEA. I apologize. I was about to cough. Okay. Section 504 regulations also do not provide periodic evaluations. And I already told you that. So they might not be doing evaluations every year on your son or daughter. They might be turning around doing minimal things, like let's do some stuff here or there, talk to the teachers, wait till this following school year to really talk about, does the child still need separate location for testing, preferential seating, those kind of things on a 504. They're going to let the new team look at the child in the classroom, get to know him or her first, then we'll adjust the 504 if need be, okay, which is very, very important. IDEA does require that our children are tested every single year. The whole point for testing is to see how he or she is progressing, making sure that we're creating goals on a yearly basis. We're not using the same goals every single year. We shouldn't be, and we need to be moving on as to how he or she is progressing every single year. And then, of course, there's a reevaluation for children with IEPs, and that is typically every 3 years. And that date would be listed on your IEP as well. Okay. So when we're determining whether a student is eligible for Section 504 services and what type of services they should have, the team should consider the documentation information that they have from a variety of sources. Okay. They also can use standardized achievement testing, aptitude tests, and the team also has to take into account information provided by the child's teachers, doctors, other service providers, and the parents. If the parents also obtain an outside independent evaluation on their child at their own expense, that information should also be considered by the team when they're looking at possible placement decisions. And it's important that the team also consider information from these sources to ensure that a student's 504 plan is based on his or her individual needs and not any assumption about the child's disability. If the team decides a student is eligible for 504 services, a team will next decide on what accommodations or services the child needs, collectively referring to this as a 504 plan. If the team decides a student is not eligible, okay, the parent must be provided with an explanation as to why the child is not eligible for a 504. The parent can appeal this decision through a hearing in the district. An eligible determination is a 504 team. Okay, so it must include people with knowledge about the child. We need to look at the data and the placement options. And when I say placement options, I just want to make sure I'm not talking like self-contained classes. Some kids with 504s, we have different types of placement options, and we will talk about that. But I really want to make sure that you're understanding that I'm not talking self-contained settings, okay? So when we say the placement options, they will review the data from a variety of sources, as I've already said. They will include the evaluation information from the parents to determine if the student is eligible for a 504 protection and services. They're going to be looking at a lot of different things. So is the process very similar to an IEP? Yes. Is it something that we really need to make sure that everything is considered when we're looking at a 504, just like an IEP? Absolutely. Okay. So that's why I'm saying to you, you should make the referrals to the CSE first. They're going to do everything extensively. Then if the child doesn't meet the criteria there, then we're going to look at the 504 to see if he or she meets the criteria there and where they're struggling. Not all kids will meet the criteria for an IEP. And then, of course, the CSE will say, I think we should go to a 504 to see if any accommodations there might be helpful for the child, okay? Which is very important to know. They are two different things, two different avenues to help a kid. And just because a child also, some kids they just start off on 504s, because you can go both avenues. You can go the 504 team, or you could go to the CSE, but I always recommend go to the CSE first, okay? Let them do the testing. And then if that doesn't work, then maybe a 504. But for the parents who might start off going to the 504 team, there are some kids who might be on a 504. And then as time goes on, we realize that 504 isn't working. And then they're kicked up to the CSE. It can go back and forth between the two. I have seen it over my years of doing this. Okay, Alyssa, I normally don't do this, but I am going to stop for a second to see if there's any questions and or comments.
So we have just one question currently. Someone asked, do you find that some schools prefer to just make the accommodation rather than actually granting or processing a formal 504 plan?
That is a fabulous question. And yes, what the schools should do before we do 504, or even an IEP, okay? Unless the child is formally diagnosed with a disability, then we would want to go to CSC. Schools have AIS, academic intervention services, so they should try to use other interventions first before they implement a 504 or an IEP. So academic intervention services or RTI, response to intervention. They should be trying to use building level tools that they have to help a student first before we go making any referrals. And the length of time, now that's going to vary. Some people might say, oh, let's do, 3 to 6 months to see if this is going to work. I'm a firm believer that I like to say we need to set a time frame as to how long we're going to play around with any AIS or RTI. And if it's still not working, then we need to make the appropriate referrals. But yes, they will implement and they should look at those first as options before we start going to 504 and or IEP. And again, that will vary student to student on a case by case basis. So I hope that helps answer that question. Can I go on, Alyssa?
Yep, that's all the questions.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to be sure before I moved on. Okay, so there's a team of people that are, like we have for IEPs, there's a team of people for a 504. So you have the student, if appropriate, just like an IEP, but I think the kids should be there if they're old enough to try to advocate for themselves and tell us what's kind of going on and how we might be able to help them. The parents, principal, teachers, the psychologist who's possibly providing evaluation data, nurse, if appropriate, for kids who might have medical needs, social workers, counselors, and others as appropriate. So it could be any of these people that are part of the 504 team, okay? So if your child is identified as an individual with a disability under Section 504, decisions about the child will be made by the school's team, which are these people, which will include staff members, okay, who collectively are knowledgeable about the child, understand the meaning of the evaluation data, and the options available to the child within that building of what they have to be able to provide supports and services and accommodations and modifications, okay? The parent and guardian are also invited to 504 meetings, which is very important to make sure you know that you are part of this team. It's a team, okay? And if your child's placement or services are to be discussed so that you're there. The 504 team will also ensure that your child is placed in, of course, the least restrictive environment, known as LRE. They will review a plan, and the 504 team must convene periodically at least once a year, okay, to review the 504 plan to ensure that it is meeting the needs of the child. And if we need to make necessary changes, then they will do that. That's why I said students with IEPs, they will have annual reviews, and they typically go from anywhere from January to June. They can also do them over the summer if need be. But for kids with 504s, they might not meet prior to the school year. They might wait. So like we just started school in September. Some kids that had 504s and have a 504 currently, the team might be meeting currently in October. They might have waited for the child to start school about a good 4 weeks. Then the team is going to meet to say, this is what the child's 504 is. What are you seeing? And the parents are invited. And we talk about, should we add things, change things, what's going to work for the child, because the environment might be new teacher, new building. You never know what's going to be different. And then we assess the 504 accommodations and modifications for that child. But it needs to be done at least once a year. That's what I've seen over my career of doing that. They typically meet once a year, but there's no set time frame that they have to meet prior to the start of a new school year or not, okay? And most of the schools that I work with, and I cover 21 counties between Breen and Columbia all the way up to the Canadian border, most of them will typically try to meet in like September after the teachers have got to know the child and see if the 504 plan is still appropriate and if we need to add things or change things, okay? That's what I've seen over my career within 504s, okay? And reevaluations, the 504 team, as I said, they will meet occasionally, and the child must be evaluated before a 504 plan is substantially changing. So if we really feel that we need some significant changes to a 504, we really need to be sure why we need to make some significant changes to a 504. And we might want to say we want to do some evaluations before we make those changes, because that's typically when we say the 504 may not be working and the child might need to go up to the Committee on Special Education. Okay. It does happen and it can happen. So when people are saying there's a lot of things that we think need to be changed here, or added or whatever, and there's a lot of things that are happening with the child, it's now time to do some evaluation, because we might want to be sending that child to the Committee on Special Education. And it's going to vary again, child by child. Oh, 504 chairperson, left that person out. And that person could be, as I said, typically in some districts, it could be the CSE chair, could be the CSE director. It's going to vary district to district and the size of the district. So always make sure that you check your website and you call the school district to find out who the players are and get names of people. Okay. And most districts do have them listed on their website. Okay, so now we're going to talk about creating the 504 plan. Okay, as I said, legally, there's nothing saying it has to be written, but best practices is it's common sense to put it in writing. Okay, I know I couldn't remember everything for kids who have 504, so it's better to put it in writing. So a plan describes all services and accommodations to be provided to meet the child's individual needs. And a written plan, as I said, is not required. Okay, but it is considered good practice. Okay. And the parents need to make sure that they have a copy of that plan. Time and time again, I talk to parents every single day, and they may not have a copy of the 504 plan. That 504 plan is as critical as an IEP. It's a document as to what we're all doing with your son or daughter, so that we all can be on the same page. We all understand what we're working towards, and you, the parent, know what type of accommodations are being provided for your son or daughter, as well as your son or daughter knowing the type of accommodations that are being provided to him or her. We also want our children to learn how to advocate on their own behalf. And if they don't understand their own 504 when they're old enough, and I know some of you might be like, my child's really young. I get that. But when they're older, if they can turn around and know what that 504 plan says and understand what is supposed to be being provided to them, we want them to know. We want them to be able to say, hey, I'm supposed to leave the classroom during testing, or hey, I'm supposed to have my tablet to be able to do this on, or something like that. If they don't know their plan, they can't advocate for themselves. So we really need to make sure the kids do know what their plans are. And that's why it's important to have them at the meetings as well. Okay. So school districts are required to provide students with disabilities appropriate educational services designed to meet the individual needs of the student as equitable as the needs of students without disabilities are met. Schools must develop a 504 plan for eligible students that describe the services, as I already said, and accommodations that will be provided to the child. The plan should also include where the services will be provided and by whom. Okay. Section 504 regulations do not require, as I already said, that it has to be in writing. It's just best practices that we do this. And a written plan allows all parties to be clear on what has been agreed to and provide parents with adequate notice of the team's decisions. Additionally, those responsible for implementing the plan, they will know what is required of them. So the team needs to know what their job role is when they're implementing a 504 as well. Okay. The plan should also include a communication plan. Okay, so that the parent knows how the information will be communicated to everyone who works with their student, including staff such as lunchroom aides and or bus drivers, if there's certain things that are on a 504 that these people may need to be part of. Okay. Again, there's a slew of things that can be done for kids with 504s. It's going to vary student by student, case by case. What does the child need, and who's going to be involved in this plan? Okay, which is important for everybody to know. I think a lot of people think 504s aren't worth anything. They can do a lot of different things. It's just making sure that they're implemented accordingly and we're all on the same page. And I'm going to take a sip of water. Okay, so types of educational settings, and I talked about this a little while ago, not talking self-contained settings. In general, a student with a 504 plan may be placed in 3 possible settings: a reg ed class, a reg ed class with supplemental services, and special education and related services. So we could be looking at a student who might need help and they say, oh, well, we've got a co-taught class. They might have an integrated class or basic resources. So that's what we're saying, when we're looking at possible placement options. No student on a 504 plan will go into any type of a self-contained setting or out of district placement. These are the only types of settings that he or she would be turning around and getting support from, because they don't have an IEP and the services and supports are going to be a little different. Okay, so very important that you know that, because I've had parents ask a ton of questions on that one. Okay. So examples could include accommodations and modifications such as removal of physical barriers, extended time for tests, adjustment to a class schedule. There are some kids who struggle to get up in the morning and they can't make it to first period due to some sort of medical condition or whatever the case may be. Again, varies kid by kid. They need rest periods built in. They need use of certain aids, calculators, recorders, note takers, modified textbooks. Okay. They also might need individualized homework assignments. It's going to vary kid by kid what that student may need. And there is a slew of accommodations and modifications. What I'm giving you are just some. Highlighted textbooks, special seating arrangements, which would be preferential seating next to the teacher, next to the door, whatever the case may be, back of the classroom, special seating arrangements. But when I say that, it's very important for people to remember teachers are not teaching in the front of the classroom. They're all over the room. So what would be the most appropriate setting for the child based upon each teacher and each room? So it's really important to talk to the teachers to say, how do you teach so that we know if a student does need special seating, where in that classroom should he or she be sitting? And that might be changing with each teacher based upon what they feel is going to work for them and your son or daughter. Peer assistance with note taking. And when something like this is done, the student who is taking the notes does not know who they're taking the notes for. And then they provide the notes to the teacher. And then the teacher gives the notes to your son or daughter. Okay. Frequent feedback, letting the child know how they're doing, making sure that their questions are answered, just checking in with them. Some kids might need an extra set of books to use at home. Now, I know somebody on here might be saying, well, books, kids really don't use books. Everything's more digital. Books still exist in many school districts. So everything is not going to be done on a laptop or a tablet or whatever. But some kids, so let's think about it, some kids might have back issues. And when you're carrying around a lot of books in your backpack, it really affects your posture, your shoulders. Some kids might need an extra set at home so that it's home and in school, and then there's no excuse that they couldn't get their homework done or whatever the case may be. There's an extra set at home. Separate location for testing, okay? Computer aid instruction. There is a ton of things. Enlarged print for children who are typically visually impaired or something like that. Positive reinforcement, just letting the child know that he or she is doing good. You're on target, you're doing good. But I always say to people, you're never touching the child when you're giving that positive reinforcement, because you're not going to be like talking loud in the classroom. Hey, Johnny, you're doing great. You're going next to them saying you're doing good. You might be tapping your hand on the desk, letting the child know they're doing a good job, giving them a thumbs up. Some of our kids need that positive reinforcement. And I have been saying since COVID, and I hate to bring that up, but it's the truth. Our kids went through a lot. We all went through a lot. This is something, the first time any of us have ever lived through something like that, okay? Our kids really need that positive reinforcement to make sure that they're comfortable, they're safe, and they know that they're doing a good job. And most teachers are doing that, but some kids might need that extra little oomph of the positive reinforcement for them. And then, of course, behavioral intervention plans. There are kids that still may need behavioral intervention plans, okay? So it's very important to know that even if a child has an IEP, and some of our kids have behaviors, we do plans for them. But kids on 504s, we can do behavioral plans for them as well, okay? You, the parent, would still need to place something in writing and request that we're looking at some behaviors that are going on in the classroom, and we can request FBAs, a functional behavior assessment, and then from that FBA would come a behavioral plan. Okay. So it doesn't have to be just an IEP. It can be done with a 504 plan. I don't think many people realize that that can be done. And it should be done for some of our kids because they need that. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything in my thing here. Nope. Oh, and yes, there is something that I'm missing. We can provide also for kids locker assistance, because some schools you put your own lock on and it could be one that you spin, or it could be a key. So not all kids can spin those things and go, oh, the key, the combination is 6929. If you don't get that right, it's a problem. I always had my son, and I always recommend it to parents whose kids might be struggling with that. Just get permission from the district to put a key lock on. Okay, it just makes life so much easier to do that. And then also some kids might need ramps and or elevators as accommodations within the building because they may or may not be able to travel up the stairs. Again, these are accommodations, modifications that we can implement for students on 504 plans. Okay. Very, very important stuff to remember. Kids might need tests read to them. Okay. But also important for parents to know that if we're going to read a test to a student, okay, they're going to read the test as is. They're not going to deviate. If they have to read the directions the same way 10 times, they're going to read them the same way. We cannot turn around and deviate to give a student a meaning of what something is telling them, okay? Because then we're giving them an edge. And visual aids. So there's a lot of things. This is just some. I mean, I wish I could put them all in here, but there's a lot of things that can be done on 504 plans for our kids. Here's more. Some kids, they might need to be permitted to eat or drink in the classroom. Oral catheterization for some kids with medical, administration of medication, monitoring of blood levels, monitoring of physical status, okay, positive behavioral supports, consultations. Oops, sorry, I got click happy. But again, these are more of your medical things. And if you have some stuff on a 504, we could have an IHP, an individualized health plan, to help with some of these things. It's important that everybody's on the same page, okay? So for kids who may have some of these things that we're thinking about, again, making sure it's all in writing, okay? And making sure that the school nurse is part of some of these things, and that we're having everybody on board with what we're trying to do for the child. And of course, if a student with some of these issues might be home for extended periods of time, making sure that we're providing the appropriate support services and technology that he or she needs if they're also at home, okay? And then also we want to make sure that we are providing accommodations for students who may be absent due to specific types of appointments due to their medical needs. They're not just missing school because they want to. They might have to see doctors more often than other children. So making sure that we are accommodating for those absences, making sure they have the opportunity to make up the classwork, that they're not being penalized for it because they didn't do it and turn it in. That's where conversations need to happen with the school staff, the teachers, that, you know, they might be missing certain things. What's the game plan that we're going to do for when they're not here? How do I get the work? How do they get to turn it in? You know, what's the time frame that they would have to turn that work in? These are a lot of things we have to think about. And what happens is we don't think about these things or plan for them until something happens. And then we're all scurrying around. Don't wait till then. Think about these ahead of time. Oop. Okay. And then we have also, which is very important, our non-academic services. Section 504 also prohibits discrimination against students with disabilities in non-academic settings. And we talked about that a little while ago. Okay. Before and after school programs, field trips, extracurricular activities, career and guidance services, transportation. Okay. So these are some extracurricular activities. Section 504 does not just protect students with disabilities from discrimination in education settings. The regulations also require equal access in non-academic programs run by the school district. Examples could include, the YMCA, the JCC, field trips, extracurricular activities, as I said, the career and guidance. And for example, some schools that provide career and counseling, they must ensure that students with disabilities are not guided to more restrictive careers. Okay, we don't want to turn around and say, oh, well, that one might be better for you. If a student is looking towards a certain thing, that's where we need to try to help and guide them. Okay, but receive the same opportunities as their non-disabled students with similar interests and abilities. Under Section 504, students are not provided with transition services. So kids on IEPs are provided with transitional support services. Students on 504s are not provided that, okay? They need to work with their guidance counselors on this. And I'm not saying guidance counselors are not part of kids with IEPs, but there is a specific transition coordinator that helps with guidance for kids with IEPs to talk about your post-secondary transition services. Kids with 504s are not provided that service, okay? Schools providing athletic programs for students with disabilities must ensure that each student with a disability have equal opportunity to participate. Different services can provide a child with disabilities if the school provides students with disabilities an equal opportunity to complete for interscholastic teams. Extracurricular programs can require participants to have certain skill levels to participate, like advanced placements, AP classes, band, sports, etc., as long as the student with the disabilities are not excluded simply because of his or her disability and may not need accommodations and related services. So, for example, a student with a disability must be otherwise qualified, having the necessary athletic skills to participate on a varsity team sport. So what I'm basically saying to you is, if your child wants to turn around and try for sports after school or any of these activities, they can. There are kids without disabilities that don't make the team. They have to try to make the team just like anybody else, but they can participate. So, let's say if we're trying out for football or basketball, there are kids that make the team, there are kids that do not make the team. Okay. My son did track and things like that. Track, there's no making or not making the team. It's just who's going to come in first and who's going to come in last. I would strongly encourage, if your son or daughter wants to participate in any school activities, I think it's a great way to become more part of the school community. It's a great way to become part of more of get to know their classmates, because some kids are very quiet and shy, those kind of things. And it's just an overall great activity to teach our kids about camaraderie, team sports, and just that team environment of knowing how to work together, okay, which is very, very important, okay? And for kids, when we're talking post-secondary, which is typically 9 through 12, you want to make sure you're touching base with guidance to find out what are they going to do to help your son or daughter as he or she is exiting school when your son or daughter has a 504 plan, okay? So it's very, very important to understand that. And then, transportation, some people said, oh, could that be driving lessons and things like that? That's going to depend on each different kid, as driving lessons, how he or she is getting to school, those kind of things. Okay. School districts must, okay, school districts must Establish a grievance procedure for resolving complaints. No different than IEPs, there has to be a policy for how do you deal with complaints. Designate a 504 coordinator to ensure compliance. Find out who that is, as I said, and that's typically the same person that runs the CSE meeting, but some districts do have a different person that deals with compliance. Every district designates different people. And inform parents and students about the grievance process, okay? In addition to the procedural safeguards, Section 504 also requires that school district designate, as I said, a 504 coordinator and adopt grievance procedures. Districts should notify the parents and students through the district website, student handbook, and other relevant publications about who the 504 coordinator is, how to contact the coordinator, and where to obtain a copy of the district's grievance procedures and how to file complaints. Okay, so I will be making sure that I send out information with regards to that. There is a process that you can do that. So if parents are not satisfied with the response they receive from a 504 team, um, received through the due process or district level complaint, there are additional actions. So let's say you do file a complaint with the district and you're not satisfied with that. There are other mechanisms that you, the parent, can turn around and take. You can file a complaint with the OCR, Office of Civil Rights. Parents or others should contact the appropriate regional offices. The Office of Civil Rights primarily reviews cases resolving compliance with following proper 504 procedures. Complaints must be filed within 180 days of when the discrimination allegedly occurs. And they are really firm on that, of the 180-day timeline. Okay. Complaints must be filed by an individual or an organization and address the discrimination against just one child, a group of students, or systematic issues. Okay. OCR will administratively close a filed complaint if it is also filed with another federal, state, or local civil rights agency or through an internal grievance procedure. So if you go through and you file a grievance with your district and you're not happy with the outcome of that, you can file with OCR. I have a parent that did it for many years, literally through her son's entire high school education, and no parent should ever, ever have to go through that. Every month she was filing complaints because the district did not want to do the right thing. Just blow up the young man's stuff that he needed. He needed things that were paper enlarged. He needed specific software to blow things up on his computers. And the school just adamantly refused to do these things back then, and it was ridiculous that we had to go through this. But she filed complaints constantly with OCR. Then, of course, OCR found that the district should have been doing these things. They would turn around and tell the school district they had to do whatever. It was just is never endless battle of things. And shame on the district for doing that. Just this child just needed certain accommodations. And because he was visually impaired, and unfortunately, they didn't do the right thing. However, he was able to get through school. I will say that. And he went on to Harvard. Harvard, people. Okay. Wonderful, bright, intelligent young man. And the district should have been proud to have a graduate from their district go on to Harvard. And they could have said, oh, yes, we made sure he had everything that he needed. But they caused this parent to file complaints over and over and over. So she is my guru for filing complaints. And she will turn around and tell you if you don't meet the deadline within 180 days and you don't have your facts, you can't have hearsay, you got to have facts to back up your allegations, which is very, very important. That they're not going to really address things and look at them. So I've learned that through many years of working with her, and of course, back when we started to do all of this, and her son is now 30 something. So it's very important that you stick within the timelines and stuff like that. Okay. But you have another mechanism if you're not satisfied at the district level. And then, of course, every attempt should be made to resolve any differences between the school and the parents before you file a complaint with OCR. Okay. I'm a firm believer. Let's try to work together as a team. This is not a you against them or us against them. We need to look at things as we are a team. Okay. And if we don't start looking at that, and be able to talk to people, we're not going to be able to work things out. I know a lot of people these days are just sending emails. I said to a parent last week, have you picked up the phone and called the person and physically talked to each other? Well, no, I'm just sending emails. You lose a lot of context between emails. So you're interpreting it one way, somebody else might be interpreting another. Pick up the phone and talk. And she did, and lo and behold, it was a great conversation. And she turned around and sent me an email. I was able to talk to the person and everything worked out fine and we're on the same page. And I said, see, sometimes a conversation is a good thing. I'm not saying paper trails are not good. Paper trails are very, very good, but that human interaction and making sure we're all truly on the same page is appropriate. So before you go filing anything, try to have a conversation with people to be sure we are all on the same page. And if we're not on the same page, can we get on the same page? And if we can't, then you have other mechanisms. And here are some things for OCR. And then you have for other accountable mechanisms, you have your local education agency, which is your school district, the Office of Civil Rights. Okay. And this is where you would be filing a complaint with OCR. And then I'll see if there's any other questions at this point. And yeah, we're about 11:24. So Alyssa, what do we got?
So there is nothing in the chat currently, so if anyone has any questions and they want to enter those in now.
Or if they want to have general conversation about anything, I'm more than willing to do that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So ladies and gentlemen, since you're all quiet out there, did everything I talk about now make a little bit more sense to all of you when we're talking about school?
So we do have a couple questions in now. The first is, if you lose your child's special accommodations in the school district, how do you file a complaint? I've appealed it and lost.
Well, I'm not sure what they mean by they've lost their child's accommodations. So I definitely need more clarification to that. Did the child have a 504 and they felt as though that different accommodations would be appropriate? Were they giving you a rational reason why they felt as though something needed to be removed? I need more detail to that one.
All right, so if that person can enter some more details in the chat if they would like. Our other question is, I'm wondering if you are a public school supporting a private school. The private school creates the 504, correct? It's not the responsibility of the public school.
Most private schools will create the 504s, but yet because the 504 is being implemented there, but there are some school districts that do work with the private schools. It's not very often, they don't have to. But I have seen to where the public school does work with the private school sometimes to create the 504, but typically it will be the private school that creates the 504 for the student. Or equivalent of, in some cases, a 504 too. Because it's really, in some schools, it's really not a 504. I actually saw that a couple years ago. You got anything else, Alyssa?
We are still looking on a little clarification about the first question, but okay. So the child had an IEP with services, but then they were declassified and now they're not receiving anything.
Okay, because they were so the child had an IEP and the child was declassified. I don't know when the child was declassified from an IEP. But the committee based upon whatever services that child was receiving, because some kids are not getting a ton of stuff on IEPs, and that's why they might say, okay, we're going to declassify them now, because any child on an IEP, we hope that they're doing well. We hope that they're progressing and they're doing better. Okay. And then we will turn around and say, let's assess, should we declassify them? That's great if that happens for some of our kids. It is really awesome to see that happen. But you never want to just see an IEP ripped out from underneath the student's feet. So we would really want to make sure that we are implementing based upon what the child had to make sure he or she is still supported. They're weaning the IEP away, not just taking it away, and then implementing possibly a 504. Again, depends on what the student's needs are. So I don't know where this person is from, who they are, but I'm more than willing to talk to you about it, because he or she may need a 504 with minimal accommodations to support him or her if we feel as though they still might have those struggles. But if they no longer have an IEP, yes, those accommodations and modifications and goals and all of that and services, they're going to be gone. They're going to wean it away. They're not just, like I said, going to rip it out from underneath their feet. Some districts will do like 6 months. Some districts will do a year to wean the IEP away, to make sure that the child can stand on his or her own 2 feet before we take it away officially. But it varies, again, student to student and case by case. So I hope that answers that question.
And we have no more questions right now, but for the benefit of, perhaps that questioner and others, the information for parent to parent, I believe, is in your PowerPoint, but do you want to tell us a little bit briefly about parent to parent and how you can assist individuals?
Yes, Parent to Parent is a statewide organization, and I work underneath a federally funded program called the Parent Training and Information Center. And we cover underneath the grant here 21 counties, although the PTIC is statewide. Okay, we all have different regions. And what we do is we assist parents one-to-one over the phone, reviewing IEPs, doing trainings and things like that. And what my point has always been when I'm doing this job is to empower parents to understand what are your rights and how do you advocate with the school district and work together as a team. So we're here to help in various different ways, but I'm always all about trying to work together as a team. It should never be an us against them, because that's not going to work. And I know sometimes that feeling, I've been there. My son David is going to be 38. So I get that us against them feeling, but I have learned over the years that that doesn't work. You've got to work together as a team. And it's trying to educate ourselves as to what are our rights for our children, because you are your child's voice. You need to know how to advocate for your son or daughter. And you might think that it's somebody else's responsibility to do that. We're here to assist, but you will be the first and you will be the last person to advocate for your son or daughter. You are their voice. So it's you learning how to do this to the best that you can. And everybody's at different learning levels. So we're here to help by calls, by, attending presentations. However, you need support, just give us a call and let us know, and that's what we do. And in my PowerPoint, the address is in there, and my phone number is area code 518-381-4350. And again, as I said, I cover 21 counties between here and the Canadian border. If you're not sure what area you're in, just let me know and I can make sure you get the appropriate referral for your region. But that's kind of what we do in a quick nutshell underneath the PTIC program. Anything else, Alyssa?
That's it for now.
Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, if there's no further questions, no other comments, I'm hoping that this was helpful. I apologize with all of the coughing and things like that. Please forgive me. As I was saying to Alyssa earlier, great time of the year, get that bronchitis. We're all going to get that at some point in time. I will make sure that you have the PowerPoint. I will make sure that you actually have the document from 504, the federal statutes and things like that, as well as a few other documents. So Alyssa will also be letting me have the attendee list. So if there's something that you need further, don't hesitate to reach out. But I will make sure that I get this information off to Alyssa. She will get it off to all of you so that you have this. And if you have any questions about anything that you're looking at or further things you might think about later on, do not hesitate to reach out and give me a call. I am a week behind in my calls. I'm not going to sit here and lie. I'm going to be honest with you, but please leave me a message and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So, Alyssa, that's it on my end.
Oh, Tina, we did actually just get in one more that pretty common question, I think. Someone asked if there's an advantage to having a 504 in place in high school to have this follow a student that's going to college.
That's a great question. IEPs and 504s do not go to college. They don't exist in that world. They are more school district level. When a child moves on to college, they have disability student service offices. Some of them call them that, and they might call them something different. And these people will sit and talk to your child and you, but they will be addressing your son or daughter because he or she is going to college. We're not, we're just paying the bill. Um, and they will look at the IEP and or the 504 and talk about possible accommodations that the child may be able to get at the college level. But we don't call it a 504 or an IEP at the college level. They really don't exist. We talk about now it's more ADA, Americans with Disabilities Education Act, and making sure that they're not being discriminated against based upon his or her disability. So they don't go on technically in that sense. Other types of things are created at the college level. But that's a fabulous question. And then, of course, for working purposes, so there are some adults that are in jobs that might need certain accommodations. Again, ADA applies for people working in the community that need certain types of accommodations, and they must disclose to their employer that they have a disability to receive these types of accommodations. So some people don't want to disclose, but if you're looking for some sort of accommodations, you must disclose your disability to talk about the types of accommodations that you would need to perform the job. So thank you for that question.